Hey everybody, this is Scott Schnaars, and we are back for another edition of Lunch Money with Scott and Adon. As you can probably see, Adon is not here today. He is off on a fabulous vacation with his family at the time of this recording, and by the time that this goes live, he will be back. So he'll hopefully be back here at Lunch Money next week. But today I am super lucky. I've got a guest, a very special guest today. My guest is a psychotherapist, a coach with over a decade of experience in helping out high-performing leaders navigate major life transitions. Her name is Auburn Meisner, and she specializes in guiding the CEOs and entrepreneurs through these pivotal moments like a business exit, redefining their identity, and overcoming burnout. And what I love about Auburn and the things that she's working on is that she uses science-based strategies to foster this resilience and authentic connecting and redefine success for her customers. So Auburn, welcome to Lunch Money. I'm sorry that Adon is not here to meet you as well, but it's great to have you here. So last week, Adon and I talked about how to set your goals for 2025. Today, Auburn and I are going to talk about something that impacts every salesperson and every sales leader on the planet, and that's burnout. So we're going to talk about what it is and what causes it and the impact and how to identify burnout, not only in yourself, but in the people on your team so that you can help them before they burn out. So Auburn, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start out with just kind of what is burnout? We've all, anybody who's in sales has experienced burnout. We all know what it feels like. You know, sometimes you just kind of get the blahs and you're like, oh, I'm really burnt out. And other times it hits you like a ton of bricks and it kind of causes you to just completely shut down. So what is burnout?
You nailed it. It's this state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by prolonged and excessive stress. And stress in and of itself is not bad. It's good for us to have some level of stress, but when it's chronic and you don't ever get a break, it wears you down and it actually has really bad effects on your health.
Yeah, both physically and mentally, right?
Yeah. And emotionally, I mean, your what's it called? Your fuse
your
is
window of tolerance.
Yes, that's a very, very nice psychological term. Yes.
So as a leader, Auburn, one of the things that we have to do is understand what are the ebbs and flows of all of the people on our team. And early in my career, I had this leader, a guy called Eugene Lee, who was able to identify that burnout was coming to me. I have no idea how he did it, but I'm curious as a leader myself, what are some of the early warning signs that I should be looking out for somebody on my team that might be experiencing burnout? What are the specific behaviors or patterns that I should be looking out for there?
Great question. And it's great to have leaders have their eyes on their employees. One of the things is withdrawing. If they're just less active at meetings, they're not speaking up, they kind of seem like if you call on them or if it's their turn, they're somewhere else. They're not really engaged. So withdrawal, as well as outbursts, like something really small.
Oh, interesting.
Of hey, can I ask you a question? Don't bother me. It's something that wouldn't have necessarily bugged them before is now at a level 10. And it doesn't really, the reaction does not match the stimulus. Also, not showing up, being late, missing deadlines, and a sense of cynicism. If they're not really excited and they're starting to complain a lot more, that might be some sneaky signs that they need a break.
And as you're saying that, I've experienced every single one of those and I've seen people do it, and I'm guilty of doing it myself too, which is probably terrible. But again, this is where you start to identify, where are you going to hit that windshield from a burnout standpoint? What do you think that leaders should do? And when you're coaching your clients, what do you recommend that they do to proactively prevent burnout before it really becomes an issue? Are there some things that they can do on a daily or weekly basis from a check-in standpoint that you have found that are particularly effective?
Yes. One of the best things is to have one-on-ones with them if that's possible, but to also have a open door policy, meaning they can't just walk in, but if they need to come talk with you, write you a note, but proactively,
great action items.
Basically being really curious and not making it outcome oriented. Saying, how are you? What's going on? How's life? How are the deadlines?
You have to give a shit about people, is what you're saying.
You do.
And I think when you do truly care about them, it's probably easier to see that coming than if you don't give a shit at all.
And you can just ask directly. Say, hey, I've noticed, you've been out, you've had some sick days lately, or you've been coming to the office sick. What's going on? Are you okay? How's the workload? Let's talk. And it's not making it not about performance, saying, how are you actually doing? Of course, it will affect performance later if you can make them feel cared and have that psychological safety that it's okay to tell me what's actually going on and I'm here to support you rather than to say you're not, living up to our standard.
Yeah. I think that that's really good because like if you just go to somebody, like that's just going to make things worse. If you're constantly hammering on like what's going on with the deadline and you don't care, like people are going to start to feel like, oh, this person really I'm a cog in this person's machine, not somebody that they want to invest in or care about. You talked about the open door policy, which I think is critical. You talked about one-on-ones, which I also think is absolutely critical. Both have always been really important to me in my tenure at different companies. But how do leaders, if that is not their modus, like we've all had that boss before who's like, just don't fucking talk to me, man. Like, just like, let me like go do your job and like, come back with the numbers. How can leaders who want to figure that out, what are some things that they can do to create that culture of openness where the team feels comfortable admitting that they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed and burnout? Like we have this like, especially in technology, you have this like hustler mindset that somehow has permeated into this. And I actually think that it's terrible. But I think people are maybe a little bit afraid to talk about these things and to say like, hey, look, boss, like I'm super stressed out right now and I'm dealing with this thing at home and I've got this project at work that's not going quite well. Like, how can you create a culture where that openness is a really positive thing?
First of all, lead by example. If that boss has no tolerance for the personal life, I'd be curious what's blocking them of even modeling like, hey, is it weakness? Is it I don't want to hear about it. We keep business and life separate. But if they could model like, hey, it's okay to talk about this and we're actually all going to get closer. I've had a hard week. This has been a hard start to the new year. I thought we were going to make this amount of sales, but God, we've been having a slow start. Is anyone else feeling this? And just show them it's okay. It's okay to not be okay without judgment. I think the delivery really matters and using humor, but the openness and having some time where you can go outside of work and touch base if that's appropriate for the job at hand. But outside of work community is really important as well.
Yeah. God, I always feel like those things are forced fun. Right. And I just picture like my mom like dragging us to like someplace and like, you're going to have fun, damn it. Like, how do you create that kind of like culture where it's not forced fun? And is that just a matter of being an authentic leader and people go and have a good time? Like, because if I drag 20 people with me to Topgolf or wherever, like the Dave and Buster's or, like that feels to me like very forced fun. Is there a way to, and this is kind of getting away from burnout, but I'm curious to get your take on, just from a company culture standpoint, like how do you create these events that should, kind of lower that boiling point a little bit, but also not feel like, oh, fuck, now I'm obligated. Like, I just want to get home and now I'm obligated to go to this happy hour or whatever it might be.
Have it be very specific, kind of like you go into a meeting. A meeting should have an agenda item. You don't just want to go 100%. To a meeting and have it meander aimlessly. If you have this event, a forced fun, it doesn't have to be fun. It's what is the objective of this? Is it I want this team and this team who never talk to sit at a table together, and it's going to be like there'll be a half an hour where we're going to ask 3 questions and answer 3 questions, and the point is to get to know each other a little bit better and understand the different workings of this. So I think it needs to be very specific, not too vague, so people know why you're doing this, not just okay, this is what I should be doing for good culture versus here's why we're doing it. Here's what you're going to come away with.
Yeah. And it's kind of the classic, like ping pong tables aren't culture, but I do and by the way, like I don't think I've ever had an agenda for like an offsite that wasn't meetings. Like I've never had hey, we're going to go to dinner and this is why. It's usually just like, hey, let's go to dinner and we'll hang out and be buds. And I'm putting an agenda on that, like from an action item standpoint, just for me to think about moving forward. Like having an agenda for those kind of corporate fun events is awesome. What a great idea that is.
And as far as the sales culture piece, not only celebrating wins and like going out as maybe a company of like, wow, we got this great deal, but when a deal goes wrong, also there's this coach. I forget, I think it's a football coach, maybe the Steelers. I should look that up. But after they lose a game, he gets the whole team to go out to dinner and they sit and they talk about it. They make it a learning event. So it's not about failure and what it's okay, we're in this together, whether we're winning at the top or at the bottom. And so making big events not be a horrible, devastating thing, but to process it, make meaning out of it, not be blaming, and just see how the whole team can come together a little bit. So that's another event that's very specific.
Well, and it's a good idea, and it's something that I've always done. I mean, the best salespeople in the whole world are, batting 300, right? They're if you have a win rate of higher than 30%, like, you are absolutely killing it in sales, unless you get leads that are 90% of the way through the funnel. But if you're generally a good enterprise salesperson, kind of 35% close rate is an amazing career. So we lose a lot more than we win, and I think that at least what I've found is like when you can get the team talking about those losses, it creates this culture of openness where people can talk. They're not afraid to talk about like, oh, hey, you know what? I was working on this deal and it went completely sideways and here's why and here's what I learned about it. Like that culture of openness creates this feeling of safety, I think, right? Where, okay, it's okay to talk about these things that are hard things to talk about for people.
Absolutely.
Do you, now it's interesting because like we now have Boomers, Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z, like it feels like there's like 5 generations of people in the workforce right now. And everybody is going to experience burnout a little bit differently. Like, are you seeing like, do older people manifest burnout differently than younger people? And is it more like the more seasoned that you get, like, are you able to not necessarily power through it, because I don't want to encourage anybody to power through like a terrible thing that they're going through. But do you see like different ways of burnout manifesting at different levels of career?
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit.
For someone who's just starting their career, they'll probably have imposter syndrome and they'll probably burn themselves out by trying really, really hard to drink from the fire hose versus at the end, later on in the career, it might be not perfectionism, but feeling like you should be somewhere that you're not, and you might be comparing yourself. So comparisons.
There's no like Emmy award for this. Like we don't need to do a bunch of things.
This is such a great example of what people might feel is if they're always wanting to perform really high because they care a lot about what their boss thinks or their friend.
Of course.
They could get in their own way and they get a little performance anxiety, like what's happening right now. And when
I actually think like that's a really good one. Like that's like a good clip right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can notice like the whole this cascade of physiological and neurobiological things happen so stress happens when you encounter a stressor. And so it can be anything. It can be in the environment, like a deadline or a presentation or a podcast, or it can be internal, meaning like these feelings of, oh my God, how am I going to make enough money for my responsibilities? Or, oh my God, like, my body image. And so whatever the stressor is, it's a thing, either perceived or that you can see, touch, smell, feel, and your body perceives it as a threat. And so then the stress response cycle kicks up and your heart rate increases, your breathing increases, your blood vessels make it so tons of blood can go through, and it gets you in a state of fight or flight. And it's awesome. It's great for small bursts of performance, whether you're an athlete or a performer or you're about to do a sales pitch. But if you're prolonged in this whole stress response cycle constantly, it is degrading your arteries, it's messing up your sleep, it's so messed up. And that's what the signs that we were talking about earlier, and what I'm currently feeling a little bit, because I just want your podcast to be so great.
But it's interesting because like how long does that stress last? Like you know, like we've all gone into like that athletic performance thing, we've gone into the business performance thing where it's like I did a meeting with a major airline that you've probably flown. And we were there for like 6 hours. Being on stage for 6 hours is a long time to be on stage in front of people, giving the pitch, hearing their questions, like all of, and it wasn't just me. We had a whole army of people there, and they had a whole army of people there. Like, how long can one last in that kind of environment?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I know that at least every day you should do something to clear out the stress from your body, to complete the stress response cycle. So the stressor might not go away. Like at the end of the 6 hours, it's done. And then, you can go work out, because the whole point of the stress response cycle is it brings oxygen and blood to your muscles so you can either fight or flee. So exercise is the best way to flush out the stress in your body, whether or not the stressor is still there. But then besides that, connection, even if the stress, you need to find ways of releasing the stress every day if you can. Because you can get backlogged. You can get stress constipated.
Stress
and
constipated
it's not
would
pretty.
Be a great t-shirt. You should buy that URL. But it's really interesting. Like we were just talking about how people later in their careers deal with burnout or manifest burnout differently than people earlier in their careers. How much, and you talked about imposter syndrome, right? Which is huge. Like I see, like even my kids have it. Like, and I'm like, dude, you're 20 years old. Like, why do you have imposter? Like, we had dinner the other night. He was telling a friend of mine that he's just like, oh, I feel like a total failure. He's like top of his class at like one of the best colleges in America, and he's got a great job, and he's part of all these clubs. And he's just like, I'm totally faking my way through this. I'm like, no, you're not. Like, I've faked my way through this. Like, I dropped out of college, and somehow I managed to get into this position where, like, I'm a head of sales. It's like, oh, that's weird. But like, we all have it. Like, how do you, like, and I've got to imagine, like, when you start thinking about that adds to the stress and to the potential of burnout. Like, how do you avoid that and go like, no, I'm fucking good at what I do, and that's why I'm in this position, not, oh, I've pulled the wool over their eyes for the last 30 years, and someday it's going to catch up to me.
One of the biggest things is saying it out loud to someone who you care or trust. Like, even that your son can say that to you, he's not alone in it anymore. Yeah. And even just bringing it out of the shadows, it kind of deflates it a little bit. And then you can adjust the narrative of saying, actually, wait a second, what are the facts? Byron Katie has these 4 questions that are fantastic if I had them in front of me, but is it true? Is this thing serving me? What if it wasn't true? And how would that serve me? And it's very simple, but kind of
it's a great framework.
Yeah. And it seems so simple, but if you just go through it and you make yourself say, wait a second, is something else also true? You just show a different narrative that's maybe adjacent and not 100% yuck. But also, I mean, it's huge. I mean, what do you see? You've got where you are, and then you've got your son. How do you see the different generations of burnout and stress and how that's manifesting, like for you versus him?
I feel like I have this theory that people my age, I'm 50-ish, like our parents were like the boomers, and their parents were like the quote unquote greatest generation. And I think that my parents came home from the war, and like, you were not allowed to show any kind of weakness at all. Like, stress was like a made up thing. Like, if you had stress, you were weak. And they ingrained that in their kids, who then kind of halfway ingrained it in like my generation. And I think, like, to me at least, it's nice to see younger people being more open about their emotions and about what they're going through, more so than my generation, who, like, you know what, like, it was funny, I was telling somebody the other day, like, I broke my arm, and my dad was like, yeah, just rub some dirt in it and you'll be fine. Like, wasn't until I was like bawling my eyes out, he's like, oh fuck, I guess I'll take you to the hospital. It was like, that generation I don't think that you were allowed to show weakness. And I think slowly, like now, like, I love the fact that my son's able to talk to me about it. I love the fact that like younger employees are dealing with mental health issues that they have. Not being an expert on it, like, my knee-jerk reaction is like, maybe we're over medicating it. But I do think like there's a really positive thing that will come out of this younger generation being a lot more in touch with their emotions. And it's going to be really positive. And I think it's really unfortunate that, my generation still looks at that as a bit of a weakness, because I think that it's a superpower for them that they're able to talk about these things and deal with them before it becomes catastrophic.
Absolutely. If you can see it coming and it's normalized to talk about it, it's cool.
I think it's super cool. And I'm glad that there's people like you that people can go talk to about these things, because it's so important, like, to get it off of your chest. Do you find women manifest burnout and stress differently than men do?
Usually, and it sometimes has to do with not only the gender, but also the responsibilities. So there's a different kind of burnout when you are providing for the family, which could be a man or a woman, versus caretaking. But women tend to be socialized to express feelings more and seek community. So burnout can look a lot different when you actually, and then men, like you were saying, not all men, but as we were saying,
I mean, I think a lot of men, like, even still, like, we're told, like, not to show weakness, right? Like, don't be weak. You've got to be a man's man. Like, all, like, the bullshit, like, toxic masculinity stuff that we're dealing with as a society right now. I think that it comes up and it becomes really difficult for, and, obviously I can't speak from a women's point of view, but, like, it does become difficult because of all of that, like, bullshit that we get to talk about these things and to go, hey, look, like, I'm kind of freaking out right now. Like, I'm worried about this deal, and my kid's sick, and my wife might lose her job, and, like, all these things, like, start pounding up in your head, and, like, you just want to bring that inside versus, like, telling somebody about it. Who, if you have a good leader, they should be able to take your hand and go, okay, like, here's how we're going to deal with this. Like, let's take a couple things off of your plate. We value you, and how can we help with some of these other things? Like,
what do you think is the fear of showing vulnerability for men? Like, what's the fear of being perceived, or what's at stake?
I don't know. For me, nothing. Like, I'll tell you anything you want to know. But I mean, I do think, like, there's this level of, like, there is this 1970s perceived, like, man's man.
Don Draper.
Don Draper or Magnum PI, maybe not Magnum. Magnum was cool, but, like, that, like, man's man that just, like, wasn't, like, willing to admit. And, like, we were talking about, like, my parents' generation, like, you were not allowed to admit any kind of weakness, and because that was viewed as a flaw, and and I think that it wasn't probably until maybe, like, 15 or 20 years ago where it was like, hey, look, like, it's okay to be vulnerable. Like, that's, like, and it's still, like, a hard thing for me to get through my own head of, like, that level of vulnerability and to be able to bring that out and talk to people about. But, like, it's so valuable to do that, not only from a career standpoint. Like, if you're having problems at work, go find that trusted source and sit down with them and go, hey, look, like, here's where I'm having some challenges. And what I find is, I've always found, like, the people, not that I'm a great leader or a great salesperson or anything like that, but I've always found that the people that come to me for advice and coaching tend to perform better. And I don't think that it's anything that I say. Like, I don't say anything magical to them that's going to fix them. I think that it is that person to bounce ideas off of and just get, like, a second idea. And I also know that if they're doing it with me, they're probably doing it with 3 or 4 or 5 other people around the organization. And now, like, they're sharing these ideas and they're sharing these thoughts, and they're kind of letting people know this is where things stand and getting help that way.
I think it does speak volumes to your leadership style. If you're an askable leader and people are coming to you and they feel safe to talk with you and they can put it on the table and you're there to listen. There's a difference between listening and listening. You can
Listening
nod
and hearing, yeah.
versus really actually taking in what they say and having insights and being more like a trampoline than just, and asking more questions than giving advice. That's the hard part. We all really want to give advice, but if you can just be patient and let people come to their own conclusions to some extent.
Do you feel like leaders can maybe let me ask you a different way. How is stress at a job different when you're like, look, like, I have job pressure. I have to go make a number. I've got to hit quota. I've got to meet a deadline, whatever it might be, versus I just fucking hate my job. Like, and I've had both. And, like, I can tell you, like, I hate my job is a radically different level of stress than like, oh, I've got like a job pressure stress. And I'm wondering, like, how do you, as a leader, how can I identify that? But then as somebody who is going through one of those two different stresses, like, how can they manage those two things, and how do they deal with, what's your advice on how to deal with that now?
Good question. For the I hate my job piece, if you're not connected to the purpose of the company and you don't see how you are serving a system and you find meaning in it, it's going to be so tough, especially, and also with the values. You know, if you're not fitting in with the company culture, the values aren't the same, or you just don't like your day-to-day piece and you can't leave. I mean, that's going to be, you're going to get disengagement. There's a book by Patrick Lencioni, and it's, if you feel like your work is immeasurable, you're anonymous, and there's a third one. I forget the third one. But those, so finding...
Probably autonomy. Like, if you have no autonomy, it sucks.
Right. So finding ways where you can actually measure progress, even if it's little, that'll show you that you're actually doing something that is meaningful. And if you don't know, as a leader, you're going to see that someone's just grumpy, or they're not putting their all, they're missing deadlines, they're not asking questions. It's the energy too, you know? If someone likes their job, they're going to come to work and they're going to show up. Versus if someone's only like 50% there, you can feel that.
Yeah.
And also someone feeling anonymous. Like, it's if the leader can go to that person saying, hey, how can I help you feel, like, what do you need? I'm noticing you. I see you. But what are you struggling with? How could I support you? I mean, even just that visibility and making that connection can maybe sometimes, you know, bring them a lifeline back to some kind of joy.
And I've got to imagine as a good leader, like, you know, the person hates their job. Like, you can start to sense that after a little while. Do you think that you can get them back on track and get them to like their job? Or is it just like, look, like, is it like a relationship? Like, if you don't like somebody, like, you're just never going to like somebody.
Well, first of all, why do they not like their job?
Yeah.
Is it they're in the wrong department?
Yeah.
First of all, figure out what's going on. Is it changeable? Is it something that both parties can come together and collaborate on? Or is it just so big that so many things would have to change that it's better just to leave? I mean, figuring out, again, that whole open communication, being honest, and allowing people the psychological safety of, like, what is going on? If you don't want to be here, we don't really want you here, but in a much nicer way.
And I'm guilty of saying it just like that. Like, that's part of my charm, is like, I'll say it just like that.
Or even on the more positive side, what would need to change for you to be excited to work here? Put it on their lap.
That's a way better way of looking at it. What a great way of saying it. You mentioned, what was the name of the author that wrote that book with the 4 things that you just mentioned?
Patrick Lencioni, and it is like the 5 reasons why employees disengage. It's so good.
Shoot that over and I'll share that. That's awesome. Thank you.
Well,
are there other frameworks that you are there other frameworks that you like to use that help employees assess, like, is my burnout just like I'm under a lot of stress, or is my burnout really like systemic, and I was like, oh, maybe I actually do kind of hate the job? And I don't want to, like, everybody has stress, and I don't want to push somebody down the I hate my job path. If they're just like, I was mentoring somebody the other day, and she was kind of lamenting about some of the challenges that she has. And she just has basic, like, early stage startup job stress. But I think that she's going down this path of, like, it could turn into I hate the job real fast. And part of our discussion was like, all right, let's just take it back a little step. And, you know, I had to, you know, maybe talk her off a ledge a little bit, but is there another framework that you would recommend where we can go, okay, like, here's how you can decide, do you really hate the job, or do you just kind of hate the position you're in right this second, and knowing that position is going to change in a day, a week, a month, whatever it might be?
Absolutely. And it starts with awareness and forethought and present moment.
Talk about those 2 things, because what does that mean?
If you actually value feeling your feelings and being able to articulate them with nuance, and so taking time to actually check in and notice how your body is feeling. And are these nerves? How is my stomach? How is my throat, my appetite? Just being aware of how you're feeling from day to day and kind of checking in with yourself and noticing that, you'll kind of notice if what's going on, if it's getting progressively worse, if you're kind of flowing like this. And then the forethought piece is, if you're paying attention to your well-being and your stress level, and you're like, okay, I know that this quarter is going to be hard. This is going to be a haul. I'm going to expect that my sleep might not be great and I might need a little extra, versus, okay, well, I'm way past that quarter. I'm into the second quarter. I'm still not good. Okay, maybe this is not a sustainable piece and this is not a good fit for me. Versus, the forethought is see it coming. Have a little plan. What's on your agenda? Look at your calendar. Take time to actually schedule your calendar. And then at the end of every day and the beginning of every day, take time to check in. How are you? How can you tell?
How do you check in? Like what are some examples of like checking in? Because I always hear people say, oh, you got to check in. Is that a 5-minute meditation? Is that taking stock of like, what did I do yesterday? What do I want to accomplish today? Like, what does check-in look like to you?
I'm going to start with an analogy and then I'll tell you what I do. So with race cars, I've heard this from a coaching workshop, but when you're in a race car and you're going really, really, really fast, the race car has to go to a complete stop for the engine to check and to change the wheels. You can't just slow down and people check it on the way. You actually have to stop. So the first thing I do is pause, put your phone down, like see if you can just put all the input down and close your eyes and take a few breaths. So pause, breathe, notice, listen. So that's my framework. Pause, breathe, notice, listen, and then discern. The discernment part is this normal? Is this okay? Or is this not okay? And then you can decide. So that's my little top-down stop. Breathe. Notice, what are the sensations, the temperature, the tension? Is my mind going 1,000,000 miles a minute? Listen. What are the thoughts, the beliefs? Pause, breathe, notice, listen, discern. What does this mean? Why? Where is this coming from? What is my body asking for? God, I need more sleep. I need a little bit of alone time. And then decide, okay, I'm going to take this weekend and I'm actually going to just be with friends, or I'm going to just have a Netflix and chill. So just pay attention and then listen to your body.
That's really good. I love that.
Yay.
That's really awesome. It's really, really cool. What
do you like about
sales
it?
culture? Well, what I like about it is like it's something that I've never done before. I've never like done those 4 things, and I'm excited to look at the transcript of this so I can go back and look at all of them. But I think it's like a good way of reflecting and thinking about how do I avoid, like it's already a very stressful job. And, I think a lot of salespeople self-medicate with a lot of booze and drugs, and like that's obviously not a good long-term way of fixing that stress. And I think like if you sit down and you go, okay, what do I really need right now? And you listen to yourself, like you ask that question, you truly listen to yourself. I think that goes a long way to kind of really getting to the root of what the problem is. Not this is just, I'm gonna have a beer or a couple of cocktails and it's gonna be a quick fix. Right? Because the couple of cocktails does not take away it fixes the symptoms, but it doesn't fix the root cause. Right.
And that whole pausing piece, I have this cheesy therapist feelings wheel behind me.
Is that on a pillow?
Yeah, it is. So when people come in, and I ask, how do you feel? I'm trying to expand the vocabulary that you use to figure out what is going on inside of you. And if you can have more precise language to describe what's going on inside and say, I'm having this feeling versus I am angry. I'm having the feeling that I'm angry. It's just words, but the more nuance you can get with your feelings, the more quickly they go through you and the more easily you can identify where it's coming from. So versus just angry or upset. What is it? Well, I was embarrassed. I put my foot in my mouth at the sales call. Okay, what do I need? Maybe I need compassion. I need to go like make fun of myself with my best friend, and that will release it.
So, and we've all made fun. We've all like screwed up on the sales call. And I think like bad cultures will beat you up on that. Positive cultures will kind of go, okay, like, you know, Scott screwed up, but, you know, whatever, and sort of let it go under the bridge. What are the things that you've seen when working with other leaders to create positive cultures, and specifically positive cultures, ideally if we can talk about it in a sales organization, that prevent burnout while still fostering that accountability and performance?
So it's not just putting the values up on the wall or having these company events. It happens every day through small actions. So in order to create a positive company culture, it's how people behave to each other little by little every day. So it's making eye contact, asking questions, being concise, celebrating wins. There's these little gestures we do to signal psychological safety, and we're in this together. And it's not one event. It's these little connections that happen over time. And people sharing, oh my God, I messed that up. Oh man, I've been there before. Versus, God, how could you have done that? Right? Okay, I can tell you these things. So culture's built over time with consistent action and connection. It's not just, hey, we value honesty. It's, what does that look like? How does that
That's
show
such a
up
dumb value too.
every day? I know. Well,
Not me. I value dishonesty, so I just want everybody to come in and lie to it. It's like, I woke up and I chose anarchy. Like, that's insane.
right. Well, plus radical honesty is not very useful. Like brutal honesty is not great. You want good feedback and anyhow, that's like a whole nother conversation.
I think one of the things, I actually learned this from Adon. One of the things I think that he was good at was every year we would sit down and we would define, what does excellence look like? And we would make a list of like, hey, here's what our expectations are because we think this is what excellence is. And I've taken that and I've taken it to other organizations that I've been working with to like sit down and go like, this is what we think that excellence looks like. So that way at the beginning of the year, people know. And it's like, look, like, you know, and that allows us to foster this sense of accountability, and it allows us to foster a sense of performance without creating burnout, right? And like nobody is surprised when we say, oh, like, you know, we expect you to forecast accurately, or oh, nobody is surprised when we say like, hey, look, if you have the opportunity to go see a client, like get on the plane and go see the client. Like, let's not do this over Zoom. Like, let's go do these things. And I think that when you define, you know, your definition of excellence, because every company is going to have a different definition of what excellence looks like for them. But when you can define that, when you can define what excellence looks like to you, then it's easy to put everybody on that path and help them get to that level of excellence.
1,000%. And then you're laying out actions that lead to outcomes. So rather than the outcome itself, and if you don't make the outcome, you failed. Well, wait, let's just rewind. What are the actions that you want to take? And that's how you measure yourself versus...
So here's something that I've always struggled with in sales, because I'm competitive against the number. And I think that a lot of salespeople, I think that there's this misbelief that like every salesperson is like this killer, like hyper competitive, want to step on your neck kind of thing. And I've seen sales organizations that are like that. They're very like competitive, and people will steal accounts. They will steal deals. They will undermine their peers. They will do terrible things to each other. And I'm just curious, like, when you think about healthy competition, what does that look like versus one that creates animosity or this undue stress, which just then leads to burnout even faster?
That's a good question.
That's why I asked him, Auburn.
Healthy competition can be so fun, and it can just enliven you, but in the same sense of knowing that you're still on the same team. So I think it really comes to my success is also your success is my success. And so how do we know each other really well and build each other up without being too greedy? That's a good question.
And do you think that that's something that is, do you fix that with compensation, or do you fix that with culture?
What do you mean? Compensation?
Well, so like, I can fix problems with compensation, right? I can write a compensation plan that says like, you are going to get paid on ABC and XYZ, but you're not going to get paid on DEF and TSU, right? STU. I can write a comp plan like that keeps people in their lanes and keeps them focused on what I want them to do. It becomes onerous, and I feel more often than not unnecessary. Like, I don't want to write a comp plan because one person is shitty, right? I can't manage one shitty employee to make sure that 20 people are safe. Unfortunately, like, I've been in positions where I've had to do that and it's not fun. Similarly, like, I can create a culture like you're talking about that is, hey, look, like, we're going to work together. And when I see, the rising tide lifts all boats approach to it. And I like that way a lot more. But I'm just curious to get your take. Like, is one better than the other?
Well, money comes and goes. It's very important, especially for sales, because you need to make those deals in order to get but it's got to be the people and the connection. If you don't feel like you're really on the same team and that you can trust each other, I think you're going to perform a lot better if you have that sense of trust and uplifting and connection and really genuinely feel good about someone else's win. Of course, it's okay to have some jealousy or envy and that, but even talk about that openly so it doesn't become poison and vindictive and then start this toxic competition.
The worst.
I mean, it's normal to have those feelings, but then get through it. Find ways of joining again. Yeah, the culture's... Go ahead.
No, you had mentioned the idea of toxic competition, which I think is a great but horrible word. Are there ways to create competition? This might be a question I edit out too. But are there ways to create competition where it's not toxic, but still drives that kind of positive behavior? And then that gets into, again, like, now you're fixing the problem with compensation, not necessarily with culture.
Have you seen it in your work where there's been a way of turning competition into something that feels healthy and fun?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, it is, you celebrate the wins. If you're in a position, you can talk about losses, maybe publicly, but certainly privately. I think that, I'm not a big fan, and maybe this is a generational thing, but I'm not a big fan of the participation trophy. But I want to make sure that people who do a great job are recognized. And sometimes doing a great job, I think part of it is, like, if you make sales all black and white, you just go like, look, like, you have $1 million quota and you either hit it or you didn't. Like, I've seen a lot of very good salespeople do all of the right things and not get to their quotas. Like, that happens year in, year out at every organization. Because some days, like, the dominoes fall in your direction and some days they don't. And I think that if you take a good seller and you beat them up to the point where they quit or you have to fire them because you've taken this black and white line of, like, look, like, you're either above the line or you're not, even if they've done all of the right things to get there, like, when you start shooting good people for doing all of the right things and this one thing didn't happen, like, that creates a really toxic culture. So I think that it's not only do you want to celebrate these, and, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the number is not important. The number is absolutely, positively, critically important to the success of any organization. But if you have a seller who is, like, meeting the clients and they're giving the pitch right and they're doing everything right and you get down to the end of the quarter or the end of the year and the client goes, hey, look, like, your deadline and my deadline are just not aligned. We want to buy this 30 days from now. Like, you can't fire the person because of that. Like, you just go, okay, like, they're going to buy it in 30 days. Now, if they don't buy it in 90 days, that's a different issue that you've got to deal with, because clearly then the person is doing something incorrectly. But if they're doing all of the right things, I don't want to beat up people. I want to recognize them for that. And there's ways to recognize people for doing positive things for the company and for the culture that aren't specifically tied to a number.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And that goes into the just good communication, knowing not just what the goals are, but the actions, knowing that, okay, you've taken all these great actions. I see that. It's just a hard year. So.
Yeah. So as we get here to the end of this, what are 3 actionable strategies that you recommend to your clients that people watching or listening to this can do immediately? Like they're going to get to work on Monday, right? I'm a sales leader and I've listened to this over the weekend. Like, what are a couple of things that I should do first thing Monday morning to ensure the mental well-being of my team and preventing burnout and adding additional stress?
Depends on the company, but finding a way of weaving in humor, even if it's like starting
Okay.
a meeting with checking in, like what are the roses, what are the thorns, and having the leader go first. Here's something that's awesome, and here's something that, needs a little work. And you get people to just start practicing being vulnerable, and also, you go with the positive, and you also, show a little bit of the vulnerability. That's one potential.
By the way, I don't want to derail you, but I love that because we do rose and thorns with our kids every time we have dinner together, and it's awesome. Like we all get to talk about, we call it sweet and sour, but like rose and thorn is the same thing. So
I
I
love
love,
sweet and sour.
and I've never used it at work, which is crazy. Like it's something that I do every night, but never necessarily use at work. So I'm glad to hear you say that. That's a good one for the office.
My caveat though is knowing also what to reveal in a group versus in a one-on-one. There's definitely a line between how vulnerable and personal you want to be with your you might not want to say, hey, I'm going through a divorce right now, unless that's the kind of company you've got. Let me see. So I found the three things. Anonymity, irrelevance, and immeasurement make people go crazy. So if you can find a way of measuring, like, what are you doing? What are you doing, and what is it for, and what's the purpose? How does it serve the company as a whole? And finding ways to measure what you're actually doing, that's great. Irrelevance, knowing that what you're doing is serving the purpose. I'm going to send this all to you. And anonymity, again, making sure each person in the company knows that they matter and that you see them and that they're not just a cog, but a human being who's helping this company go forward. So that's where scorecards come in, but having a personal scorecard of like, where am I now and where am I going? And on this project, on this goal in this year, and what are the actions that show that I'm going towards that? And lay those out really specifically.
Would you recommend that individual contributors sit down and go through that list and go like, oh look, like I don't think that my boss knows who I am, right? And the bigger the company, obviously, like if you work at Amazon, like the executive staff if you're a lowly coder at Amazon, the executive staff there is not going to know who you are. Like how far up the ladder do you go with that anonymity before you go like now you're just being like an attention hog?
The manager, who you directly report to, needs to be showing you that you matter, helping you measure your work, showing how it's relevant. Yeah, it's really, it doesn't have to necessarily be the C-suite, but whoever is directly in charge, that would be the best. Your manager, whoever's your manager.
Okay, cool. What are there books, tools, workshops that you would recommend for leaders who want to kind of get a better understanding of burnout and how to build a positive culture inside of their own organizations?
Funny you mentioned that. They're right here.
Yeah. Is it yours?
No. The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle is great. And he tells stories of really high-performing teams, from Navy SEALs to even this comedy club who has such amazing trust that this is great. I love this book for creating good culture. I have a book on burnout, but it's specifically very feminist based. So I think this is great as far as the science goes, but I think there's probably more inclusive books on burnout than that. But it talks all about the stress response cycle, but specifically for women. So any women listening to this, yes. Men, it's helpful, but I would say just listen to her TED Talk and you'll be fine.
Cool. Where can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn and just reach out to me on LinkedIn or my email.
Awesome. Auburn, this has been amazing. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Scott.